Welcome back. We continue now. Author Alistair Mackay is no stranger in publishing queer stories. He has published numerous story journals as well as in the anthologies, Queer Africa and Queer Africa 2, which was a finalist in the 2017 Lambda Literary Awards. Alistair is back with another book entitled The Child, described as a fresh and insightful addition to queer literature, as well as the story of a new generation of South Africans at large. So this book explores themes of childhood, love, identity, and also living. Alistair joins us virtually for book review at this hour. Alistair, good morning. Thanks for your time with the SABC at this hour.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Congrats on this latest, well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you, and congrats on this latest feat. Perhaps we could even look at the inspiration behind deciding to write The Child. I mean, we're inspired to write about a queer couple adopting a child in Cape Town. Any personal connections to the themes and the settings this time round?
Sure, yeah. There's quite a lot of personal connections to the story, although it isn't autobiography. But I did. The story starts with a gay couple moving home to Cape Town from New York. The main protagonist has had a sort of mental breakdown and he's lost his job, and they want to start again. They want to start afresh. They want to have a sense of hope in their lives, and they want to start a family by doing that. And so I did. My partner and I also moved home to Cape Town in that same year, not for the same reasons. But I just thought it was a really interesting lens to apply to look at some of South Africa's social issues, and to tell a really personal story, about growth and healing, but also through the lens of family and how we recover from our own childhoods. So there's a lot of personal stuff in there, but there's also a lot of stuff about South Africa. And there's not that many stories yet about queer couples of our generation sort of moving into that space of parenting the next generation.
Well, speaking about drawing parallels from real life experiences, I mean, and also without giving too much away, we know that the narrator confronts childhood specters, and obviously that's a fascinating concept that comes to the fore. And I wonder if you could just speak to these specters, how the adoption process even triggers these, the emergence they are, because we really want to look at the past experiences, the impact that the relationship has with his partner, the adopted child at large. I mean, how would you describe that phenomenon unfolding?
Sure, so that's exactly right. So as the adoption sort of starts getting underway, the main character realizes that there's a lot of stuff from his own childhood that he hasn't maybe dealt with properly, or that he thought he had dealt with but is maybe in denial about. And so he starts going back to therapy, and as this sort of process is unfolding, he starts unraveling a little bit, because he starts realizing that there's a lot of things about his own childhood that he hasn't processed properly. And so the book looks at a lot of things. One of the concepts is this idea of screen memory, and the way that our memories play a trick on us and sort of make us remember things in a different way to what might have happened, or maybe put up a false memory to cover for what really happened if we are not able to cope with it. And so he's attempting to be a better father, and he's trying to sort of fix himself so that he can be a good parent. And in doing that, he starts sort of picking apart some of the stories he's always told himself about himself and his own upbringing. And so then that all starts to unravel with some dire consequences for his life and his relationship, but then ultimately it is how he navigates his way through that so that he can be a more gentle, more caring parent.
And Alistair, the environment, the playground that, if you want to call that this all takes place, obviously plays a pivotal role. I mean, from New York, you see aspects of, Cape Town's culture itself coming to the fore and playing its part in the story. And I wonder how the city itself has contributed to the journey of the characters, but also through the overall themes displayed in the book as well.
Absolutely. So that was one of the fun things about writing about Cape Town, returning from New York. And it's, as I mentioned, something that I went through myself. There's this thing that happens when you've spent a few years living overseas, right? And you return to South Africa, and some of the things that we maybe take for granted, or that is just such an ordinary part of our lives, that we sort of become numb to it and we don't notice it. So if you've been overseas for a few years and you return, that stuff strikes you freshly, and you realize how abnormal some of the things about society in Cape Town are. For example, the sort of extreme inequality, which I think often we are sort of blind to. But if we've spent some time outside of the city or outside of the country, then that becomes clear. So Cape Town is very much a character in this story, both the good and the bad. The Cape Town of tourism brochures and holidays is real, and it's there, and it's a beautiful city, and there are things about the city that he loves. But there's also the sense of like this unresolved trauma, this historical trauma that South Africa is still carrying that we haven't yet managed to heal from. And one of the ways that plays out is in the relationship between the main character and his domestic worker. So he becomes very close to his domestic worker, and he initially doesn't want to have that relationship when he moves home. He doesn't want to have that kind of dynamic, that sort of power dynamic in his life. But then he becomes very, very close to her. And they become genuine friends, but it's met with this idea that it's an unequal relationship. And actually, when he really needs to understand stuff about her life so that he can help her, he ultimately ends up letting her down because he isn't fully aware of her life. She's much more aware of his life than her life. So the unhealed trauma of apartheid is still very much in the book.
No, absolutely. And this is why, this offering, the child really has become a conversation starter of note, because I wonder, as we wrap up just very quickly, I mean, facing some of the challenges, writing about, a queer couple's journey to parenthood. I mean, what sensitivities or obstacles did you have to overcome on that front, especially when it comes to power dynamics and agency as well? And just LGBTQI plus literature at large, do you think enough is being done, to incorporate such themes and such material in South Africa alone? What more could be done, just in parting?
Sure. So I do think that we are seeing an increasing number of LGBTQ titles and stories, which is really wonderful. I mean, a few years ago, it was quite a niche thing to be writing about and seeing on TV, but I do think we're seeing more and more of it. I think what's beautiful about that is that we're starting to see that the queer experience is so many different things. It's not just one story or one experience, which used to be the case. It was always a story about coming out and how difficult that was, and it can be very difficult. But then, so this I'm trying to show, the journey towards parenthood and what is that like, which is quite new. So it obviously hasn't been legal for that long. The sensitivities around it were. Yeah, I mean, I spoke to friends who've been through the process, dealing with some of my own feelings around it. So, there's something particular about our generation, and where being gay is not illegal. South Africa was one of the first countries to legalize gay marriage, but there is still a lot of damage that a lot of us carry from our childhoods because it's quite a homophobic society in some ways. So it's finding ways to sort of weave between that sort of damage and hope, which is what I'm trying to achieve with that book. No,
absolutely. Alistair, I know that there's so many more questions at this point, but we have run out of time. I think you've given an adequate teaser as to what we can expect. Thank you for your time and for sharing that story, for writing your story as well, contributing to South Africa's heritage at large. We'll leave that conversation there for now. Alistair Mackay, author of The Child, was really just chatting to us about his latest offering.